This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. We are glad to have you with us. Well, we are within the confines of the COVID-19 pandemic for another week. The governor is plowing forward, though, on talking about reopening the Arkansas economy. I'm joined now by Paul Gatling. He's the editor of the Northwest Arkansas Business Journal. Always good to have him with us. Paul, let's begin with the Arkansas Economic Recovery Task Force. This is the governor whose task force he's assembled about 27 Arkansans, if I remember my math correctly, to study reopening the economy, led by a person whose last name will be very familiar to a lot of Arkansans, but maybe not the first name. Let's talk about Steuart Walton. Who is Stuart Walton? Why is he the right guy to lead this effort?
Yeah, it's a big group, isn't it? Close to 30 people on that task force. Steuart is, of course, a Walton heir. He's the grandson of Sam and Helen Walton, and or I should say a grandson, and he's a son of Jim Walton, who's the Arvest Bank chairman and CEO. Board of directors for Walmart the past 4 years. He is an attorney by trade. He's been an attorney in London. He's worked for the M&A group at Walmart at a time in his career. And his business in Bentonville is co-founder of a holding company called Runway Group, which is also not just a holding company, but more of an economic development group. They have a lot of economic development projects involving hospitality and restaurants and real estate and aviation throughout Northwest Arkansas and the state. So I think he was, I think with conversations he had with the governor, you know, in the past couple of weeks, he was just displayed an eagerness to help in any way he could, and I think the governor took him up on it and said, hey, how about this? We'd like you to chair this Economic Recovery Task Force. So I had a chance to visit with him last week after that group's first meeting on Tuesday. Of course, it's like we said, it's a large group, so they formed 3 subcommittees out of that group that are working under that are probably meeting more frequently every day, I would imagine. The task force is supposed to meet again next week, and their job is to not necessarily figure out when the economy will reopen, but how the economy will reopen once that time comes.
And what do you think will go into the decision-making process for this task force?
Well, the healthcare data will determine the when. And other than that, I think we're just kind of at the mercy of these dates that the governor has set. You know, we've had this 2-day surge that he has announced for, you know, past Friday and Saturday to get a bunch of testing data under their belt, and really the healthcare data will determine the when. So the how will be, you know, these ideas and recommendations that this group of leaders in this task force will present to the governor. I'm sure the ideas are flowing freely as we come up on this week, and the governor has set those dates that he's going to announce if certain aspects of business can open up or begin to make plans to open up on May the 4th, and that's coming up this week.
Important to note, too, that the task force says they're going to deliver some recommendations to the governor by May 4th. Not necessarily everything's going to reopen on May 4th, as some people might believe. There'll even be some recommendations delivered in June.
Right. They'll have reports they're going to present to the governor end of May, and even again at the end of June, and that's just what we know right now.
Well, let's shift our attention to a company in your backyard there, Tyson Foods of Springdale. They've closed 2 meat production plants this past week. They're not alone in this. There's been some other meat production companies that have also closed because of COVID-19 outbreaks across the country. How dangerous is this situation for Tyson Foods, not only from a public health perspective, but from a PR perspective?
Yeah, let's take a look at it first from the Tyson perspective. They have closed actually 3 plants in the past week, 2 pork plants in Iowa and Indiana, and a beef processing plant in Washington. That affects, from the Tyson perspective, about 6,400 workers that they've told to stay home, and 6,400 workers that they're going to need to test because of some outbreak at those plants. You know, in the Waterloo, Iowa pork plant is Tyson's largest, one of the largest in the country. Same for the beef processing plant, one of the largest in the northwestern part of the country. So that's 6,400 workers that are idled, and that's 3 plants. And like you say, there have been about a dozen beef and pork, chicken processing plants throughout the country that have been closed. It's worth mentioning Tyson has about 20 or so plants in Arkansas, and none of those have been affected so far have been identified as having any outbreak or any hot spots. So from that perspective, Tyson really doesn't know when those plants will reopen. They're kind of waiting on, they're working with health officials in those areas to get their employees tested, waiting on those tests, and then you'll determine what percentage of the workforce will have to be quarantined or won't be able to allow back into work, and then will you be able to operate those plants with the number of workers that you have determined that are safe to go back to work. So a lot of different variables that are in play right now for 3 large plants in the Tyson network.
And what could be some of the ramifications for the food supply chain in the United States?
Right, I think the pork plant in Iowa has a capacity of about 20,000 hogs per day, and the beef plant in Washington has about 2,400 head of cattle per day, which is enough to feed 4 million people each day. So you're talking a big part of the supply chain. I read one note that the amount of beef, pork, and poultry that's in cold storage right now in the U.S. is about a 2-week supply. And then when you talk about keeping these production facilities offline for a minimum of 2 weeks, when you talk about those 14-day quarantine spans, you begin to think about deficits. I don't want to say shortages, but you begin to think about deficits in terms of meat that will be available. I don't think you might not see the impact at your big box retailers or in grocery store chains like a Walmart or Kroger or places like that, but there are conversations now about beef deficits and pork deficits in the country because of not just the Tyson plants that have closed, because of about the dozen or so. Smithfield is one that has closed plants. There are some other plants around the country, and we might see more plants around the country. Who knows? I mean, like everything else with the coronavirus, it's a day-by-day headline, and so right now it's an issue that is certainly going on in the beef industry.
He's Paul Gatling, editor of the Northwest Arkansas Business Journal, part of the Talk Business and Politics umbrella of news outlets there. Thank you so much, Paul.
All right, thank you.